So I think DEI is our biggest thing, anti-Black racism, anti-brown racism, and that's racism that's specific to certain targets. And then, of course, women are not minorities, and so many of us have to unlearn that. We actually are the majority, and so we should actually have control over our bodies because we not only they're our bodies, but also because they're more of us than other people, and we actually bring people into the world. We create the population.
We'll discuss race and how it plays a factor, and how we didn't even talk about this topic because we were afraid.
A Black Executive Perspective.
Welcome to a Black Executive Perspective podcast, a safe space where we discuss all matters related to race, especially race in corporate America. I'm your host, TonyTidbit.
And I'm your co-host, Chris P. Reed.
Expanding on our episode, Wilmington's Lie, today Dr. Nsenga Burton, our new BEP contributor, delves into the significant role Wilmington, North Carolina has played in the realm of civil rights and social justice activism, concentrating on the critical 1898 coup and its wide-reaching effects. Dr. Burton provides an in-depth exploration of the city's historical landscape and the dedicated activists who have been instrumental in its story.
So let me set the table here. The multi-hyphenated Dr. Nsenga K. Burton, an award-winning entrepreneur and media influencer, is the mind behind The Burton Wire, a premier news site focusing on the African diaspora, with her work featured in over 200 newspapers weekly and reaching 22 million readers, plus an online audience of over 3 million daily. Dr. Burton's impact is profound. With 20 plus years as a college professor, she has penned numerous academic articles exploring race, gender, sexuality, and media. Dr. Burton, welcome back to a Black Executive Perspective podcast.
Thank you so much, Chris and Tony. It's wonderful to be back and be part of the team. So thanks for letting me in. Like this. You know, I'm coming in with my elbows.
No, hey, look.
Make room.
Yeah, come on in with your elbows.
Yes.
And excuse
Make
me,
room.
you know, you can see the difference of the second time you've been here versus the first time. So I had Chris read the bio, and he was able to pronounce diaspora, okay? Because I couldn't, right? So I made sure he was able to do that, all right? But again, welcome back. And, you know, what I said earlier, kicking off the episode, we're very excited because you're going to be a contributor to a Black Executive Perspective. Starting next week, you're going to be hosting a weekly segment called Need to Know by Dr. Burton. You're going to, based on, you've been a contributor, as Chris talked about, with a lot of different publications. So you're going to share your expertise and talk about current trends and challenges and achievements influencing Black leadership and empowerment. So we're really excited about it because you're going to provide great content, not just from your perspective, but also from the Burton Wire, and provide a really good viewpoint and analysis that really, for our audience, is definitely going to help them inspire some action. So we're excited about this opportunity. We're really looking forward to it. And, you know, this is something that together, both of us, because both platforms are trying to basically make, you know, our audience aware of what's going on and educate them. So really, really excited about it.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much. We have great chemistry and conversations offline and online as well. So it's just a no-brainer for me. I'm just happy to be able to bounce things off of you and to have these conversations that are going to help uplift and impact our communities.
That's awesome.
Dr. Burton, let me just ask you a question. Considering your demanding schedule, you're obviously one of the sought-after minds that we look to as a culture. What motivated you to become a contributor to BEP?
Yeah. So when you have a platform, as you all know, and you curated it and cultivated it in a very thoughtful and intentional way, when you decide who to partner with, you know, like I decided to partner with NPA, you have to be very thoughtful and intentional in terms of who you want to align your brand with, right? And so just looking at the work that you all have done, looking at the mission of the Black Executive Podcast, looking at your backgrounds, your professional backgrounds, and looking at your vision for the future and for what you want to achieve, coupled with, I would say, your advocacy and your love of Black people and your willingness to engage different types of perspectives from all sides of issues. For me, it was a no-brainer. So I felt like we are aligned in that way in our mission to uplift our communities, align in a way to educate our people with fact-based information so that they can make the best decisions for themselves and their families and their communities. And so that's why I said yes. I mean, it made sense, so I think that we are aligned in so many ways, and that we work well together. And so that's why I said yes to you.
So, Dr. Burton, why don't you share with the audience some of the content that you will be sharing with them on a weekly basis?
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know me, I am a media scholar. My area of expertise is intersectionality. I look at media industries, pop culture, culture, very much into cultural studies and history. And I look at all of those things through a historical lens. And so I'll be talking about a myriad of topics depending on which trending in the week in which we are recording. So for example, let's say if we were talking this week, there's so much stuff that's going on, but whether you talk about O.J. Simpson, and his passing. I just said, I didn't say we have to talk about it. I'm just saying, and his passing, right. We can talk about that. That's something I would talk about. I've been featured on Court TV in the 25th anniversary of the OJ trial, right? So I could talk about that. If we talk about the wonderful women's basketball and the NCAA women's championship and the upcoming Olympics, I could talk about that. I mean, I could talk about how great Caitlin Clark is. She's amazing. Love to watch her play. She's phenomenal. I love that she talks smack. I love that she's also humble, all the wonderful things. However, I would love to hear more about the University of South Carolina players who actually won, especially since they're young sisters, they're Black and brown sisters, the MVP is Brazilian. So there's just so many interesting things that we could talk about all around that, whether we talk about media cycles, whether we talk about issues of representation, whether we talk about access. And then, who gets to kind of be the face or the voice of these kind of institutions that are tied to larger institutions like media and what have you historically. So those are some of the things that I could talk about on a regular ongoing basis. So I'm looking forward to really digging in and figuring out what works best with your audience or our audience.
That's
and with our audience, and how to bring really important information and ways to think critically in an engaged way about these topics. So,
thanks.
In an attempt not to diminish any issues that we face currently, in your opinion, what is the most pressing issue or top, issues that we face as Black executives today? I know you bring a historical perspective, which is very valuable to me and near and dear to my heart. But today, as you see it, what are some of the things that you feel like we still have to go, and what would your contribution address in that fashion?
I mean, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, the rollback of DEI. The idea, the mythification of, these, underqualified Black people getting all these jobs, which not even line up with the statistics or the data at all. Even with affirmative action, which is gone, even with DEI programs, we still were grossly underrepresented, especially relative to the percentages and the proportion of Black and brown people who actually graduate from college, and which is supposed to be the conduit to excelling in American society, right? So I think DEI is our biggest thing, anti-Black racism, anti-brown racism, and that's racism that's specific to certain targets. And then, of course, women are not minorities, and so many of us have to unlearn that. We actually are the majority, and so we should actually have control over our bodies, because we not only they're our bodies, but also because they're more of us than other people, and we actually bring people into the world. We create the population. So when the pressing issues that are impacting our community, and that impacts Black people specifically, when we think about Black women and maternal mortality and those numbers that just keep going up, and you keep seeing these high profile incidences. Most people mistakenly think it has something to do with class or your economic status, and you keep seeing these women of exceptional means dying in childbirth, dying right after childbirth. These are Black women, of course. Serena Williams almost lost her life because they were like, "Oh, you're Serena Williams. Of course you don't know how you're feeling this pain. Of course you don't know." And so we got a lot of major issues, but definitely this anti-DEI, anti-Black racism, Black and brown racism, I would say the election is coming up, because I really think that that's going to determine what kind of future, if any, Black folks are going to have in this country, if we should even stay. I mean, you know, I'm a bit of a progressive, and, and a bit of a rogue personality in certain ways. So I don't think, you know, I said we already built the country. So if y'all don't want us, we can go and do something somewhere else. We were fine where we were. So yeah, I think those are the pressing issues. Anti-DEI voting in this next election, like we have some sense, because that is critical. And then also thinking about the ways in which we are being impacted by these policies, and the real world outcomes for us, most of which are largely negative. We have got to get on top of this and do something about it.
Well, listen,
It's interesting.
yeah, I mean,
But Tony, you
go
know,
ahead.
it's funny because she put something on me. When you invited me to contribute, I bought a backpack and she done bought luggage.
Yeah,
Like, she
look,
got so
look.
much. I mean, good Lord.
She
You
already
got a
got
room?
Yeah, she already got the plane ticket. All right, she already got plane tickets and knowing where she's gonna go.
Man, you
So
ain't lying.
I got it. I got some catching up to do. All right, but all that being said, I think our audience is gonna have some catching up to do, because as you can see, this is very exciting. Dr. Burton brings a wealth of knowledge and experience, and she's going to provide perspectives that, you know, some you may agree with, some you may disagree with, and some may make you say, So we're so excited about her being here. We're fascinated by it. So we really appreciate her joining a Black Executive Perspective. But now I want to ask Dr. Burton, are you ready to talk about Wilmington's Lie, Dr. Burton?
I am. I'm absolutely ready to talk about Wilmington's Lie. And you remember I got very excited because I actually lived in North Carolina for 5 years. When you told me that's what we were going to be talking about, I said, okay, let's get to it.
Okay, so let's talk about it. So let's jump right in, my friend. So obviously, you know, Chris and I did the episode Wilmington's Lie, which was a very unknown story. Probably 99% of the U.S. population didn't know anything about it, and probably 99% of the people that lived in Wilmington, North Carolina, didn't know anything about it, right? So based on listening to that episode, what's your overall thoughts, and as we dive in deeper?
Yeah, I mean, I think Wilmington, North Carolina is really one of those civil rights. It's one of those iconic civil rights places that just kind of gets lost in the shuffle because we're so transfixed on places like Atlanta, where I live. We love Atlanta. Atlanta is a cradle of civil rights. Alabama, the entire
Birmingham,
state.
yeah,
Right,
yeah.
the entire state. Cradle
Right.
of civil rights. I'm from Richmond, Virginia. I believe that civil rights are another one of those civil rights places. Washington, D.C., another one of those civil rights places. And I think that Wilmington, North Carolina just kind of gets lost in the shuffle based on its location. And it's not so close to kind of like the seat of power, which is Washington, D.C., the capital, or what I would call that, these southern cradles of civil rights, like Alabama and Georgia and other places. So, and many other places, South Carolina, even, I would say. So, I think that when you told me about it, I was like, okay, yeah, let's get into it, because Wilmington is a really interesting place because it was the largest Black city in North Carolina for many, many years. And this is leading up, of course, to the massacre. And it was founded really in 1865. You had these U.S. colored troops who were fighting in what we would call the final stages of the Civil War. So they were at Fort Fisher and nearby Curay Beach, and then they trekked 17 miles to what is now called Wilmington, to fight the Confederates in the Battle of Forks Road, which happened February 20th through the 21st in 1865. So the USCT, that's the U.S. Colored Troops, that's the acronym, won the battle, which took place in the grounds where the Cameron Art Museum currently sits today. And that was a pivotal point in the Civil War, because the Civil War ended a month after that. Right. So that's an important battle, which we don't learn about in school. I don't even think they teach about it in North Carolina, from what I understand, in many schools in North Carolina. Some places they do, but many places they don't. But that's a pivotal battle, because that battle was kind of one of the last points of entry that was taken from the Confederate soldiers, right? Because they had already lost Virginia. They had already, so they're moving on down. And so then they lose, Wilmington. So a month later, they can no longer continue the battle. So they have to concede, right? So people don't talk about that, but that was due largely to the work of an all Black troops that marched down there and did that work. And then those are the folks that settled Wilmington, North Carolina. So
Wow.
that, this legacy or tradition of civil rights activism, of I would call rebellion, of really self-determination, that was always from the beginning. It was always from the beginning. So that's part of their DNA of Wilmington, North Carolina, and the people who are there and who come from there and continue to stay there and fight the good fight. So I think that's important for people to know.
Yeah. And so based on that, and based on all that information you just provided, right? And then based on what happened in this city that was predominantly 56% Black, that was sharing power, political power, with their white brothers and sisters, okay? And then obviously it was overthrown, okay, by, white nationalists, which printed everything in the newspaper in terms of what they were going to do. So it was, everybody there knew. But based on that, why do you think the story is so still unknown by many today?
I think the story is unknown by many today because it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for people. We are really obsessed with this idea of people being comfortable, and not Black people, but everybody else being comfortable with issues that are of importance to our society, issues that are difficult for us to work through in our society. And so because we want people to be comfortable, except Black people, to be comfortable, a lot of our history is just either hidden, it's obscured, the books are being taken out. They were being taken out before. Now it's just a movement, another time, right? It's been happening before. It happens in cycles, where the books are being removed from these schools, particularly in the South. Anything that teaches them, teaches students anything about the realities of what happened during the Civil War, the realities of what happened in post Civil War and Reconstruction. And so I think I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all. I just think it's a larger system of domination. And one of the ways in which you can continue the power structure is when you keep people from information, either misinformation, it can be disinformation, or you completely just remove it, obscure the information. People are invested in Black folks. I would say Black and brown folks, but definitely Black folks, particularly in the American South, not knowing their history, not knowing the contributions that they have made. Because if we did know, we would push back even harder and fight even harder for ourselves. We were enslaved people, but we were not slaves. We weren't taken because we didn't have any value. We were taken because we were valued. In fact, we were so valued that they had insurance policies on us. And if we died or, were thrown over a boat or whatever, they could get paid on us. We were valuable. And so I think that's why they continue to bury these stories of excellence, of resiliency, and of triumph that exist in our community.
Wow. I mean, listen, that was a warm-up question, and you and you threw down. You can see why she's going to be a contributor on the Black Executive Perspective, right? Because she just broke it down. So I don't even have any follow-ups to that. Chris, you got?
I do.
Go ahead, buddy.
You said something that kind of made me think about the fact that the sensitivities that are being addressed have nothing to do with us, and I don't know if they feel like the darkness or the melanin makes us have thicker skin. Irony intended.
Yes.
But why do you feel that? Because honestly, we have shown ourselves to be some of the most forgiving and considerate people, and so that information is more of them feeling ashamed than us, sparking up, some type of rebellion or feeling a certain kind of way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just the displaced anger, it's displaced mistrust. It's a level of it challenges the dominant narrative of white supremacy, and that's what people don't want to admit. They don't want to acknowledge, right? If you can say, "Oh, actually, Black and white people lived nicely together." Now, it wasn't like it was, all great and wonderful, but they had learned how to live together peacefully for many, many years until Black people started rising, right? I.e., home ownership when you really legally weren't supposed to own homes, but because they had segregation and redlining and all of that, you were able to do so in certain areas. Business ownership, the Daily Record, which was a Black owned newspaper that was there, right? And so then you have these newspapers that are like, hey, they don't cover our births. Because people always talk about Black newspapers for like activism, which is true. But they also did things that humanized Black people, right? So they were like, hey, a baby was born today to this family. Hey, these folks got married. Hey, these people had a family reunion, because family reunions, we started that too, right? So they were doing that kind of stuff, which is activist in nature now, because we know that even now today, people don't cover that in newspapers. They get 100 submissions and they might have one Black person in there, right? If any, and that can be even the New York Times, right? So I think that when people have to think about who they are in the context of what happened, and they got to think about their grandparents, right? And their great grandparents, in the same way that we do, where you'll be like, oh, my great great grandmother was a slave, and they'll be like, oh, my great great grandfather was a such and such, and he was this and he was that, and I'm like, and he was also a slave owner. But what does that mean? What does that do to your dominant narrative of goodness and purity and piety and all the wonderful things that we pretend to be, that we never were, because we're all complex human beings, right? We all inhabit this earth together. We all, some of us are born into things. Some of us were pulled into things. Some of us were kidnapped. Some of us were willingly given, all those things, sold. So everybody has their different types of experiences. But the fact is that it's the truth. And you cannot get to peace until you go through the conflict. Like, that's the only way to peace. That's it.
You had mentioned Fort Fisher at that time, and then its effect on the Civil War, and then how it spread, 20 miles or so with the Wilmington thereafter, and how it was built up. Being from Illinois, understanding how Fort Chicago became Chicago, which is one of the most multicultural, diverse cities in the United States, at this point in time. Wilmington had that start. It was the quote unquote American dream, or the inception of the American dream, as far as a cosmopolitan area where people got along enough to, live in conjunction and have opinions, right? We had opinions back then, right? And so take me into that. So we're talking about, 30 years later, it blew up. How did that hold itself, or what was the beginning of, was it never going to work, is my question to you? Because it seemed as if on the surface, looking at the historical records and looking at some of these positions where you had doctors and postmasters and you had different people that kind of settled into this American dream in one of the largest cities in the South. What was the beginning of the end of that in your interpretation?
I think when people get power, we're seeing it now, right? When the wrong people get power in their hands, when they see an opening to take something from people they view as less than, or should not be rising as quickly as they would like, or with whom they shouldn't have to share resources and income and power, because those are just Black people. I used to be a slave. Why I got to share my stuff with them? I used to own those people, right? When that starts rising, and these dominant ideologies about white supremacy, i.e., whites are the preferred race, they're the chosen ones. One of the reasons that Black people were enslaved was because white theologians convinced people that Black people didn't have souls. So one of the ways in which people were able to have slaves, because they didn't think we were human or that we had souls. We weren't going anywhere when we died.
Right.
There was no heaven or hell for us. Right. So when you think about it in the context of this information, it could work. It was working. But in order for it to work, people have to believe that truly everyone is equal and has the right to the pursuit of liberty and happiness. And when you have enough people who have enough power, and to use those institutions, media, newspaper, right, schools, churches, right, all of that, and use institutions to undergird or strengthen those that type of ideology, and to make it normative, because ideology also requires consent, right? This is why we don't fight back enough, because it becomes invisible. It just becomes normative. Then that's what happens, right? And so when the Daily Record publishes op-ed saying, hey, y'all keep talking about And this is, after Birth of a Nation, or, this is before Birth of a Nation, all that eventually comes. But you all keep writing all these books, right? Hundreds of books about how these black men are going to go out and rape these white women. When in fact, what is happening is the opposite. Black women are working in the houses of these white men and are being raped and made to forced to raise their children who can't inherit.
Right.
Legally.
Right.
And so that's what happens, right? When you start pushing back and saying, hey, no, this dominant narrative that you have, yeah, we can coexist peacefully, but as we would say now, what you're not going to do is, tell these lies about what is actually happening to us and our people and our women.
Right.
Then, people then start to come together and figure out how can they bring these people down. And that's how you get these massacres, because they know, and this is what people don't understand, like, why didn't we do this? Why didn't black people do that? We had no rights. People didn't even start going to jail for killing us, including each other, until like 1950s, 60s, right? So we didn't have any rights. There was no value. Right. So you could go and burn up somebody's house. They were like, oh, you're not supposed to have a house anyway. You could go and burn up somebody's business. You could lynch people and nothing happened. No one's prosecuted. Or they would have like a trial like with Emmett Till, where people are like, yeah, I did it, and it was because of this. And they're like, okay, dismissed, innocent.
Right.
So you could, there was no way for black people to really have any type of justice at that time and have any type of protection, even from the police at that time.
Right.
And so that's how these things happen. Yeah, of course, it could happen. It could work. But everybody has to agree that everyone is actually equal and deserves the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness.
You are the publisher, CEO of the Burton Wire. As Chris stated when he went through your bio, people, there's 200 million people that can read, have access to some of the things that you write and put together. Talk a little bit, you spoke a little bit about it, but talk a little bit how important the Daily Record newspaper was for Wilmington, North Carolina at the time. Because you just got finished talking about all these other things that were being pushed out to, denigrate, to, make the African American person as subhuman and stuff to that nature. Talk a little, because not only was it the Daily Record, but there have been, and you know better than we do, there have been hundreds of Black African American newspapers that speak.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about that piece.
Yeah. So the Black press is a seminal point of advocacy, activism, and information for Black folks for almost 200 years. About to have our 200th anniversary. What year is it? In 3 years. Okay. So the Black press has been around, and the Black press, and then when we talk about the Daily Record, we're talking about Alex and Charles Manley, who bought it because it was owned by a white person. They bought it from him and then made it a Black newspaper to inform. And then, they were writing op-eds in response to white feminists who were pro-lynching, right? So they wanted women's rights, but they were also pro-lynching. And so that's kind of what kicked off the massacre, their rebuttals to these other newspapers. But yeah, the Black press is instrumental in the success of Black Americans, period. Whether you talk about the role they played in the Green Book guide, right? Like identifying places where Blacks were safe to travel. And that came out of Harlem, actually, and out of the post office there, and a Black man who was in the post office, Mr. Green, who put together these guides that would keep you safe. So they would tell people what was happening. They would tell people where lynchings were. They would tell people when trouble was coming. They would inform people of their rights. They would inform them of what they need to do. Even around civil rights activism in the 1950s, in the 60s, and the 70s, like, where you need to be, how to behave, if you get jailed, this is what's going to happen. I mean, they were just instrumental in making sure that we were treated as human beings. So when we think about the Black press and we think about the role that they played in informing, advocating, and really supporting, right? They supported events. They were sponsors of a lot of the civil rights activism that was happening at those time periods. I mean, I don't think enough can be said. The fact that so many of them were in existence and continue to be in existence and were entrepreneurial, right, which is part of our legacy, which nobody gives us credit for. but we have been
Right.
entrepreneurs our entire lives, like the whole time we've been in the United States and before. But the fact that they were entrepreneurial and created generational wealth for families, some of which are still running these papers today, is one of the greatest American dream stories that is never told outside of Black America.
Wow.
The Black press is the American dream. Today, it's the American dream. Still, generations of Black people creating generational wealth, sending their kids to school, creating Black newspapers at HBCUs, and partnering even with white newspapers to cover Black content or create Black content and to cover those audiences. I mean, enough cannot be said about the importance of the Black press. And then organizations like NNPA, National Newspaper Publishers Association, the oldest Black publishers, trade association for Black publishers in the country. NABJ, National Association of Black Journalists, the oldest association for Black journalists in the country. And that people have been doing this for, well over almost 200 years. That is an American success story. And I promise you, if we had less melanin, everybody would know it.
Right. And to that point, that was, burning down the Daily Record at that time frame was significant because that was the communication for the African American in Wilmington, North Carolina. So if you eliminate that, right, people now don't know what's going on. And it's easy to, what's that old saying, chaos and disorder. If you don't know what's going on, now you're starting to panic and like, what's going on? That was there was no social media back then, right? That the newspaper was the key. So number one, thanks for that historical background because, there are the Black press is important. And I love to hear just a real quick thought on this. What is the readership today? Are a lot of African Americans still reading African American publications? Right. I remember when I was a kid, I used to read Jet. Okay, and stuff to that nature, right? And Ebony, right? Yeah.
So here's the thing: it's Black newspapers are not immune to the same issues that mainstream newspapers are, facing. People don't want to read. It was 150 words for many, many years. Once new media came into play, now people won't even read 75 words. I always say, just like our organizations that have helped us, NAACP, Urban League, National Urban League, you should subscribe to your Black paper. I subscribe to the Atlanta Voice, the Atlanta World. Like if there's a Black paper, and there is one in your state, there's probably one if you live in a major city, you should be subscribing to it because it's not as expensive as the New York Times and all those other places typically. You should be subscribing to it, sponsoring, doing sponsorships, making sure you pull them into your community events, things of that nature, because readership is low for all newspapers. They're trying now, this is what NNPA is doing with a lot of the papers, just trying to pulling them together so they have an ad network. Right.
Yes.
And like really, again, a great American dream story, pulling all of these Black papers, these 220 papers together so they have a network. Everybody benefits from the network. Everybody shares the content on the wire, right? You can use that content in your publications. You can use it online, all of the things. You can promote your events, all of the things. They have conferences, quarterly conferences. They train people on new technology and ways in which they can think of models of consumption models and also models of compensation. So all of those things, it's necessary for business, but it's also a form of activism. So yeah, the Black press is still very much alive. It's smaller, but it's still thriving. And we have to support our Black organizations, period. If we don't, you will go the way of Ebony and Jet, right? Where you then get kind of like a boilerplate version of it that just doesn't have the same weight that it did before. And those publications were so instrumental in so many parts of our lives. Politics, fashion, culture, all of it. And so we need the Black press. And when things start going down, and they've been going down, I promise you're gonna need the Black press again. You're gonna need it.
Absolutely. I think for us, kind of bridging the gap between then and now, and realizing how horrifically it's always not that different. We would hope to have so much progress and things of that nature, but it's always the person that's affected most that realizes that we haven't come as far as we thought. When you go back to 1971 and talk about the Wilmington 10, how did that, affect that portion of the country or that city in particular as it relates to reminding us of some of these sins of the past, in your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, the Wilmington 10, and actually, ironically, Chris, and it's not ironic, the chairman of the National Newspaper Publishers Association is Dr. Ben Chavis, who was part of the Wilmington 10. Right.
Wow.
So still the connection to the Black press. And, he has a degree, journalism degree, which a lot of people don't know. But you have the Wilmington 10, you have 10 civil rights activists who were falsely convicted of firebombing a store and shooting at firefighters and killing a police officer, I believe, in Wilmington, North Carolina. And they were railroaded, right? They were falsely accused, they were railroaded, and they were convicted, in federal court and had these very, very long sentences, 40 years. I think Ben Chavis had the longest sentence out of the 10. And he was a man of the cloth even then, right? So when we think about our activist pastors and people like that, when people are like, oh, I don't fool with the church is awful. Not all churches. And we have a very great history of the churches actually being part of the struggle and the movement. So don't forget those people. But like a Dr. Chavis in this particular case. And so they became known as the Wilmington 10. And eventually they were freed, but they were never pardoned. So those convictions remained on their records until 2012. And then that's when they were pardoned by the governor, Beverly Perdue, at the time, pardoned them. So when we think about Wilmington, North Carolina, it's a historical legacy of activism. It's not it's not in a silo. It's not a one-off. It's not like, oh yeah, this happened in the Civil War and then nothing happened. No. It is a continuous march towards freedom. And even today, they have a big reparations movement going right now. So they are, activists in nature. And that's part of the DNA of the area, including the Black folks and the progressive whites that live there as well. And, the multicultural population, the progressive multicultural population that lives there too. So Wilmington, when we think about Wilmington, North Carolina, we have to think, and when we think about any real, what I would say, city that has some type of historic value, what you want to be doing is thinking about it and looking at the ways in which that history is either stopped or continued, right? Because that gives you some idea of what has happened in those particular places. And it can be industrial shifts, post-industrial shifts. Lots of different things can happen to change the ways in which people move in specific cities. But Wilmington has definitely had, I would say, a very long and sustained civil rights and social justice identity for a very long, over 100 years.
So let's think about this in the concept of civilized nations and cities and things of that nature. To exist in a cooperative civilization, you have two common dynamics of legality. There's justice and then there's satisfaction. So let me explain it really quick. If you take $100 from me and then I find out that you took it and you give me back, that is justice. That is not satisfaction. I need some type of I need something else to occur to deter you from taking $100 from somebody else. In the idea of these people being arrested and falsely accused and tried and everything like that, was there ever any enlightenment on what really happened and how they got into this situation? Were they framed from the beginning or were they just a patsy after the fact? Give me a little more on the Wilmington 10 as far as that was concerned.
You have the Wilmington 10, you have the story of Assata Shakur, right? Where, when you are in the midst of fighting for your rights, things go down. Right. Things happen. And sometimes you're defending yourself. Sometimes things do happen. Sometimes you're set up. Right. They did not firebomb anything, but a firebomb happened and then was attributed to them. Right. And so we have
we've seen
in Atlanta,
this before.
Right. We've seen it over and over in Atlanta when people start rioting, they always, and I say they media, and I'm part of the media. You see lots of camera and photos of Black folks doing stuff, but there's always other photos and camera video of non-Black people doing stuff too. But the story that is told and the people who get prosecuted, we saw this in the Capitol. In what world can you break into the Capitol and then go get on a plane and go home and have dinner in time for dinner and be a Black person?
Right.
Right.
That would not, I mean, we can't even get to the Capitol. Like, if you get to the Capitol, you're lucky, right? And
Right.
and with guns, you're gonna let you know. Oh no, this is just not gonna happen. So I say all of that to say, some people, we are easily targeted. Black people are
Yeah.
easily targeted. Black women are easily targeted. You know, that's all you're seeing all these sisters getting taken down in academia right now, including myself,
Mhm.
but are easily targeted because we have historically been victimized, although we are never painted as the victim or the victor, right? So we have to paint ourselves as the victor because we have been that, especially like if you think about Wilmington, North Carolina, for hundreds of years. And we'll continue to do that in the face of anti-Black racism, anti-Black women sexism, all of the things that are happening, and then the ways that we're being targeted with this anti-DEI movement, and this falsification of our qualifications when we are truly the most educated group in the country right now, especially if we include the Nigerians.
Yeah.
Oh my God, we're probably the most educated group in the
Mhm.
world, right?
Right.
And you talk about Black folks, Black people. Um,
Mhm.
so, we have to, Wilmington speaks to that, right? When other people are allowed to tell your story, when you are disempowered, when they can put whatever they want on you and basically railroad you. That's what's happening with DEI. We're going to make all these false assumptions. We're going to play into the worst stereotypes about Black people ever. We're going to pretend like none of you all are qualified. You're all undereducated. You're all impoverished. You're all this. You're all that. When we all know this to not be true. It has not been
Right.
true for, over 100 years at least. All
Right.
right. And so that's how that happens. Yeah, it's framing, and then it's having control of the justice system or the legal system, to make sure that you are punished in the end.
Dr. Burton, one of the things, in World War II, when the Japanese were rounded up and put in camps, um, years later, I believe it was President Reagan, apologized and they got reparations. I believe, and I could be wrong, I believe the city of Rosewood, the descendants, when Rosewood, Florida, and I could be wrong, but I thought they got some type of acknowledgement of reparations when there was a riot. No, not excuse me, not a riot, a massacre. Okay, when the white townspeople wiped them out and took all their generational wealth. When we listen or when we've learned about Wilmington, and one of the things that the white nationalists really, not only they wanted the political power back, but they also wanted to get rid of all of the, like you used, the entrepreneurship that the African American people in Wilmington, North Carolina had created. And they were able to wipe that out. So based on that, there's generations of people, Black people from Wilmington, North Carolina, whose families never didn't even receive the generational wealth they should have received from just even they owned a house or the bank or the barber shop and or the post office and all those things. So, what are your thoughts about reparations for the descendants of Wilmington, North Carolina, in 1898?
I mean, I think all Black Americans should have reparations, um, including the Wilmington, the people who live in Wilmington. And Rosewood, that you are correct. There was some reparations that were made. The legislature actually, they sued, descendants of the people who were part of the Rosewood massacre, who were victims of the Rosewood
Right.
massacre, sued and settled on a $1.5 million settlement. They gave $150,000 to each person who could prove that they were part of the family that was affected by that. Then they had a $500,000 pool. I think those numbers are low. That's just
No,
me.
wait, that was nickels and dimes
Mm.
that they gave them, right?
Yeah, and if you go to
Nickels and
this,
dimes.
yes, and if you go to the Smithsonian, the African American History and Culture Museum, they actually have a whole wall that shows you the billions of dollars of the African Americans should actually be repaid for all of the things that happened to us, including the slave trade, and then the really burning down of our business. I mean, Ida B. Wells, that's how she ended up in Chicago. They burned down her newspaper press. I believe that we should be paid reparations, and the people of Wilmington should be paid reparations. I mean, my hometown in Richmond, Virginia, the Retail Merchants Association was put into place to run all those black businesses out of business, because you had to be black or be white in order to be a member of it, and you had to, in order to conduct business, you had to be a member of the Retail Merchants Associations, but they didn't allow blacks to join. That happened throughout all of the South, actually all over the United States, but definitely throughout the South. So when you put people out of business like that, I think you should be able to get reparations for that. Other groups have gotten reparations, as they should, because they're fewer in number, and it's easier to, at the time when these things were happening, and it's easier to determine what the economic value would have been for, the services they provided. Whether you talk about the Chinese and the railroads, you talk about the Japanese and the internment camps, you talk about the Filipinos, all the abuses that they suffered. So you can put a dollar amount on that. But with us, because we're so integral to the foundation of the nation, once we annihilate the native, right? And I'm not saying we black people, I'm talking about the European.
No, you're talking about the
Let's be clear, not us.
Right.
But once we literally reduce the Native American population from 100% to 2%, less than 2%, we are part of the foundation of the United States of America. And that's what makes it harder for them to wrap their minds around it, right? Because it's like, how many millionaires or billionaires are we going to create overnight? And then what are black people going to do with that? Because, we're going to make it happen. So, you open that door a little bit, we're going to kick it open. Right. So there's that too. We're not the, the model minority. We're not the minority that people just love so much. And they're like, oh, they just want to become us and assimilate and be like us, which a lot of that is false. But, that is the ideology around certain other groups. We are the problem child. Right. We have fought and fought and fought and fought and fought, and continue to fight. We die off, they kill us, mass incarceration. We still fight. It's like anti-DEI. Black people ain't even said nothing about it because we're used to it. We're like, we knew that wasn't gonna last. And, they felt so kind of way about George Floyd. It's cycles, right? So okay, let's see what we can do. Rodney King happened a little bit before. That was the last cycle before this cycle, right? Where you start getting things put in place or whatever, and then systematically they just get taken away. So we're not unused to that type of, I would say vitriol, but also the need for being resilient in the face of people coming for you constantly. That's part of us. So that's why it's hard for us to get reparations, and it's hard for them to determine how much. And then for us, we, and this is my critique of us, our people, because I know people like, she loves black people. She'll never say nothing bad about black people. I don't. But I will say this. We have to be willing to be like, okay, I'm okay with Tony getting the reparations and me not getting it. Because that was the way they figured it out or worked it out. That black people ain't having that.
I would. That be. I don't know if I would see that.
That ain't even part of it. It ain't happening. But that has happened in other cultures. It's that collective ideology.
Oh, no, you're right.
Right, and we had that before we became Americanized. We had that where it was like, okay, listen, if you get it. I mean, you got the you growing the tomatoes and the cabbage. Bring that over here, and I'm gonna give you the collards and the whatever. Like that's how we did it. That's how we moved for a very long time. And so we have to be ready to be okay with, maybe one person in your family getting lifted, like paid, and that would be it. We have to be okay with that, but you know how that is. I don't know.
Well, here's the thing. It kind of happened already, to be fair, right? Because we just talked about the descendants of Rosewood. Even though it was paltry in terms of what they got, right? But not a lot of other African Americans has gotten anything based on the same circumstances. Dr. Burton, final thoughts for our listeners.
I just need Black people to not be afraid to demand what we should have when we talk about reparations, when we talk about paying into systems. I mean, the money we have paid in taxes alone. And then even with student loans, where people are like, oh, student loan forgiveness, you should pay. I mean, the percentages that we get relative to other people And the fact that people pay for like 30, 40 years, it's not just Black people, it's other poor people, have to pay so much more money than other people when they pay back money. I'm like, don't be afraid to say that out loud. I think that we need to be proud of who we are. We need to demand, and because asking doesn't really get you anywhere. And that's why I'm so transparent in my communication. I just say it. Everybody should have reparations. Period. Now you can be mad at me. You can throw stones at me. You can be like, that girl is crazy, but I'm gonna say it because it needs to be said. I don't feel any kind of way about it. I don't think I'm taking anything that doesn't belong to us. You do owe us. You do. You owe us. Y'all think we owe you? Absolutely not. We could do nothing for the next 200 years and you would still owe us, because that is how it has meted out over this time period. So that's what I want people to understand. Wilmington is not a is not an island. It's not a thing that happened at once. This was happening all over the United States, including the West Coast, including the North. Puerto Rico, if we talk about, our other, I try not to say colony, but, that's how we treat Puerto Rico, as we saw with the last president.
Right.
But, our other places where people are connected to the United States, who are connected to the United States, we deserve certain things. We deserve to be treated human. We deserve to be able to get our money out of a system that we have paid into disproportionately. We deserve to have the same things that every other American has gotten in many cases. We should not feel bad about making use of anything. We were in the service and couldn't make use of the GI Bill, right? For many, many years. So don't let people get in your head and you thinking that you got to kill yourself to pay back all this stuff, and to do all these things. You really need to be thinking about it from a historical perspective. And I'm not talking about personal accountability and responsibility. Absolutely, you should be doing that. But when we talk about what's right morally, economically, and historically, we deserve everything that we have asked for and more. So be clear and be ready to talk about that and to say what it is and to not feel any kind of way about it. That's it.
You know what? I want to say openly and candidly, I don't believe you that's it. I know he said final thoughts, but these thoughts are going to perpetuate, till the cows come home. The great news is, as a reminder, one of the new emphasis that is being placed on the Black Executive Perspective podcast is your need to know, which will be happening next week, and it'll be hosted by Dr. Nsenga Burton, and you can start to get that information. You don't want to miss this. This is going to continue in many frames. As you can see, she's a tree with many branches. You got a lot of opinions and ain't scared to use them, right? And so it'll be enriching discussions where, she casts light on the pathways to our progress, through her expert commentary, evaluating conversations about the history, the past, the present, the future, right, of Black excellence. And so that'll be something that I want you guys to look forward to as an audience. I look forward to it as a member and an audience member and a fan and all of that. And so I think that's very exciting that Need to Know is going to start next week, hosted by you. And I'm very, very excited to see what you do with it.
Thank you so much.
I totally concur. And look, I'm sitting here, I forget, we're the host of the show. So I was sitting here eating my popcorn. That's why I was coughing, because I was just sitting back listening and watching Dr. Burton. So we're very excited. But more importantly, we want to thank you for coming on today, providing your perspective about Wilmington's lie and giving us that historical background in terms of not just what happened in 1898, but going all the way back to the Civil War, all the way up to 2024 when it comes to Wilmington, North Carolina. So Dr. Nsenga Burton, thank you a lot. And we can't wait for you to join us on a weekly basis.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you.
So I think it's now time for
Tony's Tidbit.
So today's tidbit is based on what we discussed today. And today's tidbit is by Martin Luther King Jr. And the tidbit is, the richer we have become materially, the poorer we have become morally and spiritually. We have learned to fly in the air like birds and swim in the sea like fish, but we have not learned the simple task of living together as brothers and sisters. and that's by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So I hope today you enjoyed the fascinating, the energetic, the passionate Dr. Nsenga Burton, and today's episode, Wilmington's Lie, Reckoning, Addressing Historical Justice. And one of the things we want you to know is our mission is to decrease racism, decrease all the isms, I should say. So our call to action is called LESS, LESS. And L stands for learn. We want our audience to continue to learn about the things that you don't know. E stands for empathy. Once you learn, now you should be more empathetic to your fellow human being. S stands for share. Now you should share what you've learned to other individuals. And then S stands for stop. You should now stop any discrimination that runs in your path. So in other words, if grandma says something at the Thanksgiving table, you say, Grandma, we don't say that, okay? So we want everybody to incorporate LESS, LESS. And by doing this, we're going to build a better world, a more understanding world. And this is going to help us all be able to get the change that we want to see. So tune in next week to a Black Executive Perspective podcast. Our episode, The Illusion of Power, Challenges Faced by Black Women Executives. You don't want to miss that. Plus, you don't want to miss Dr. Burton's segment as well. Go to our website, sign up for our newsletter, give us a rating. Let us know. How did you like today's segment? Give us some thoughts. Ask some questions earlier of Dr. Burton that we can then give her for each one of her segments. You can follow a Black Executive Perspective podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and you can follow us on all our socials, LinkedIn, X, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram at a Black Exec. For this, our astonishing guest, Dr. Nsenga Burton, my co-host, Chris P. Reed, my man behind the glass, Double A, which we're going to do an episode soon on Puerto Rico. So we're going to definitely, Double A is going to lead that. I'm TonyTidbit. We talked about it. We love you, and we're out.
A Black Executive Perspective.